In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Goldbreaker build. This is a New Game Plus build that focuses on the use of Marika's hammer, which is one of the weapons that you will get from defeating the very last boss of the game. People have been asking me to make a build using this weapon for a very long time, and the reason I've sort of hesitated about it is it's basically an exclusively New Game Plus weapon because you only get it from defeating the last boss and then, exchanging his soul for this weapon back in Round Table Hold. And also because the weapon has holy damage on it, which is, one of the worst damage types in Elden Ring generally. So I didn't think it would be that great, but let me show you how I was wrong. So obviously the weapon we're using here is Marika's hammer, and what I really like about this weapon, and something I didn't realize when I was first looking at it, is a lot of the damage on it is actually physical damage. I'd say about 2/3 of the damage roughly is physical damage, so you only have 1/3 of the damage holy, which is great. That means that, that physical strike damage that's going to come through, which is a very good damage type in Elden Ring, is going to kind of offset generally some of that holy damage resistance that a lot of early and late game bosses have. Additionally, this weapon has fantastic scaling in terms of potential for multiple playthroughs. Because it scales with strength, dexterity, and faith all relatively okay, you're going to be able to increase all three of these stats and get more damage out of this weapon and its weapon skill as you progress into New Game Plus and beyond. And obviously, its weapon skill Goldbreaker is what I named this build after, and this is an absolutely devastating skill for a couple reasons. First of all, this weapon has a huge AoE radius, meaning that you're going to be able to hit multiple enemies in it, and even if you glance over or fly over an enemy when using this skill, you'll typically still hit it anyway. And you can just round up enemies and just, collide into them, killing most of them in one hit a lot of the time, even in New Game Plus. And it's just a great weapon for farming or when you're outnumbered, or if you have a difficult enemy that, you want to attack and you just want to play it safe, you don't want to engage them in combat, you're going to be able to just fly into them usually one-shot them. And another thing I really like about this weapon is even if you don't one-shot the enemy or group of enemies, what this weapon skill does is it usually kind of makes the enemies flinch for a second. So it can give you some breathing room a lot of times to pull off another Goldbreaker if you're fighting a boss or a group of enemies so that you don't just get constantly hit while you're trying to do that. Another thing that makes this weapon skill particularly deadly is the fact that it has insane hyper armor. Essentially, once you leave the ground and you're up in the air doing the animation, you basically can't be interrupted. I have not tested this with every single attack in the game, so it's possible that some attacks will still stagger you out of it, but I have not seen one yet that will break this. So you can use this, and once you get off the ground, it doesn't matter what kind of poise you have in your armor, etc., you're going to pull this skill off a lot of the time, and since it hits so hard and tends to cause enemies to flinch, that allows you generally to follow up with another one that they can interrupt, and it can be absolutely deadly. Theoretically, this weapon could be extremely deadly in PvP if built properly because of this mechanic. If you can keep chaining this in a row and you can get off the ground, then you can trade damage, and a lot of times you'll come out ahead. Another thing I love about this weapon skill is the fact that it propels you a good distance forward, meaning that you can start it from a safe distance, particularly against bosses or enemies that are aggressive that move towards you, like the Crucible Knight or something like that. You can start its animation well at a safe distance, and then by the time they get in range, you're typically hitting with this, and since you cause them to flinch, they generally can't attack you before you can get another one off. And the last point about this weapon skill is that if you connect with the Ash of War and the weapon itself, which both deal damage, by the way, so you want to try and land the weapon itself on the enemy when possible. But if you can connect with both the mace or hammer and the AoE at the same time on an enemy, it does about 40 stance damage in my testing, which means that you can stagger a lot of bosses in 2 hits with this weapon skill, then giving you an opening that you can then do a critical attack with and then follow up with another Goldbreaker. All of those things together make Goldbreaker arguably one of the best weapon skills in Elden Ring, despite the fact that it deals some holy damage. Other things I'm using here, I have the Golden Order seal, even though I don't meet the requirements for it. I think I only need 1 more intelligence to meet it since I started as an astrologer. It doesn't really matter what seal you're using, I don't even meet the requirements. I'm really just using it in order to buff with Golden Vow and Flame grant me strength, but you can use any seal that you want. This one weighs 0, so, it was nice to not add any equip load to my build, but you can use any other one you want. We're not really using a lot of spells for this build. You could theoretically, pump more faith if you want, and less strength than what I have in order to kind of go more of a hybrid, like incantation casting Marika's hammer route, but I did not do that in this build. If you're going to do that, obviously you will want to make sure you meet the requirements for the seal that you're using, and you'll want to upgrade it and slot whatever spells that you want to use. I also have the Golden Great Shield here. It kind of matches the theme of Goldbreaker. I'm using the Lendel Knight set because it has 51 poise. This is not crucial for the weapon skill, but it's nice when you're, doing block counters or attacking regularly out on the landscape so that you're not interrupted when you do regular attacks. But you're going to want to use a Great Shield with this build because you have very high strength if you're using Marika's hammer, and this allows you to, block counter enemies very, very easily. And what you can get from block counters is if you combine this with something like Assassin's Cerulean Dagger, you're going to get FP back when you do a critical attack after that block counter, which then will allow you to use Goldbreaker a lot more often. Goldbreaker is very expensive. If I'm not mistaken, it's like 26 FP before carrying Filigree Crest. That is a lot for a weapon skill in this game. It's absolutely deadly, but it doesn't allow you to use it at will unless you have a way of replenishing your FP easily. And a couple ways we do that in this build are Assassin's Cerulean Dagger, and then cutting its cost with Carrion Filigree Crest down to 20. I also have Shard of Alexander with this build. This should be a no-brainer here. This is going to boost the damage of Goldbreaker. And, you could use Warrior Jar Shard if you have it as well, but obviously Shard of Alexander is the better of the two. Since this is a New Game Plus build, you'll probably want that one. Now, in my last spot, I have the Curved Sword Talisman to increase my block counter damage. I tend to do a lot of block counters with this build. But you can trade this with like the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman for boss fights to give yourself more protection when you're not going to be doing nearly as many block counters and you're just relying mostly on Goldbreaker. And that will allow you to trade damage, which you do a lot of times with Goldbreaker, and not die. Stats for this build are 50 Vigor, 25 Mind, 31 Endurance, 53 Strength, 23 Dexterity. You don't need any Intelligence, 25 Faith, and you don't need any Arcane. Vigor is at 50 for this build. This is pretty standard for the beginning of New Game Plus, in my opinion. You'll probably want to extend this to 60 at some point, because again, you will be trading damage with Goldbreaker, and as bosses get harder and harder in New Game Plus, and they hit harder and harder, you're going to want to make sure that you survive those attacks. So definitely get your Vigor up to 60 at some point in New Game Plus. Mine is at 25. You'll probably want to increase this to 30 or 35 at some point, because you do use a lot of FP with this build between Goldbreaker, Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength. And even though you don't buff with Flame Grant Me Strength all that often, you will be buffing with Golden Vow quite regularly because of its longer duration, and you will be using Goldbreaker often. So having more FP will allow you to do these things more before you need to chug a flask. 31 Endurance is just enough in order to be able to medium roll with the setup that we have exactly here. It may fluctuate how many points of Endurance you need based on the armor set that you're using or the seal that you're using, etc., because you don't have to use this armor set or that seal. So just enough to be able to medium roll is what we're going for. I have 53 Strength and 23 Dexterity here. This might seem like a weird breakpoint, but I was doing testing, in the respec screen to see like where the sweet spot for damage was. This seemed to give me the best in terms of the physical damage side. Dexterity kind of drops off at this point, and Strength is still better. So if you're looking to increase your damage here, you'll probably focus on Strength going up, and then you're going to follow up with probably Faith and then Dexterity laughs. Faith has better scaling than Dexterity at this point, but some points of Dexterity were performing very well, so I put a few points there. And then obviously on Faith, the weapon itself has 19 Faith requirement, so it seemed natural to just take that up to 25, get some more damage out of it, and be able to use Golden Vow to buff my defense and offense at the same time. Golden Vow, obviously one of the best buffs in the game, if not the best all-around buff. And obviously that allows you to slot Flame Grant Me Strength, which is better than you think because 2/3 of your damage is actually physical with this weapon and the weapon skill. So it's not bad to use, but I don't use Flame Grant Me Strength unless I'm facing like a boss or something like that, because it has a very short duration and you're not getting 100% efficacy out of it. And as I mentioned, Faith actually outperforms Dexterity, so you could increase Faith from this point. I don't think it's quite as good as Strength. It's a little bit worse, but it's not too much worse. If you want to do like a hybrid spellcaster build, you would probably focus on Strength and Faith exclusively. Might use something like the Clawmark Seal in order to increase your incantation damage. When it comes to your Flask of Wondrous Physique, I have Holy Damage, and I think I have Dexterity or Strength slotted in there. Either one is fine. They're going to give you kind of about the same damage at this point. You could put Faith in there if you want, or you can even not put Holy Damage and just put like Strength and Dexterity or Strength Faith, something like that. The Holy Damage isn't doing a ton for you. It will boost your damage a little bit, but these others will give you more physical damage, particularly Strength and Dexterity if you want to boost that. So you probably want to slot one of those three or two of those three. And when it comes to Great Rune for this build, you're either going to use Godric's or Radahn's. Godric's is not bad for this build because you do use a lot of stats. You want Strength, Dexterity, Endurance, Vigor, Mind, and Faith. That's 6 of the stats, and that's a lot. You'll want all those, so Godric's is not bad. Radahn's is also not bad for extra health, stamina, FP. All those things are good for this build, so you'll probably want to use either one of those if you're using a Great Rune. So that wraps up our Goldbreaker build using Marika's Hammer. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's been a while since I've done an exclusively New Game Plus video. I've been trying to focus on builds that people can use from the very beginning of the game to the end of the game. And obviously, as we draw nearer to the Elden Ring DLC, I hope, we'll try and focus on more maybe some DLC-specific builds as we get more information about that.